everyone. Greetings all. I am Ray Harkins, your host for 100 Words or Less, the podcast. Welcome to the show. Thank you for hanging out. So I just got back from Riot Fest in Chicago like a few days ago. I'm still exhausted. Holy moly. It was a really good time. Granted, the first day was pretty terrible. Before I dive into this, we need to talk about our guest, right? The guest this week is Andrew Koji Shiraki. And I'm totally probably butchering his last name because, as regular listeners of the show understand, I never ask their last name and I always butcher it. So I apologize, Koji. But anyways, he is a solo artist from the Pennsylvania area with a lot of releases under his belt, under a lot of different labels, from Run for Cover, No Sleep Records, very prolific, and just a very good dude. More on him in a minute. Let's dive into some business, let's do some talking, and then we'll talk to Koji. Propertyofzack.com, visit them, the show's website, so 100wordspodcast.com. Two things I want you to do. Hop on the right side of the page. One thing is sign up for our email newsletter. I've been getting a lot of really positive and fun feedback from people who are enjoying what I'm putting out there. So basically, once a week, I will hit you up, tell you who the guest is this week on the show, talk about the sort of inside scoop on what happened previously on the show, last week's show, and I just kind of, recommend stuff. So I was originally really focusing that on the website as far as recommendations are concerned, but then I'm like, no, I kind of felt differently. So anyways, go to the website to sign up for our mailing list. And then if you're feeling ever so generous, because this thing is free for you, if you find value in it, toss some shekels at our direction. So you can see a donate button, and I really would appreciate people paying attention to that. Basically, if this thing is valuable to you, I would love to see you, if it's $1, $2, it doesn't matter. I use that to offset the cost. Honestly, it is not a ton of cost, but I am trying to make this show more and more legitimate in the sense of, like, I just recently bought new recording equipment, and that was like about $600-700. It takes me a certain amount of time to put this together. I also pay the producer and editor of this show. Shout out to Tom Richfield. So basically, there's costs involved. So anyways, just put it out there. Had to mention it. Yeah, let's talk about Riot Fest. So actually, no. Riot Fest. Let's do that. Then we'll talk about Koji. So Riot Fest is really fun. For those of you that don't know what that is, it was a 3-day festival in Chicago. They're actually having one in Denver, I think last weekend or this upcoming weekend, regardless. But it's become a force of nature. And this year was the 10-year anniversary in Chicago. I went out there for work. Yeah, it was just really fun. There are so many people that go to this thing. Attendance-wise, I would guess, 50, 60,000 people. It's insane. To the point of where it was kind of a pain in the ass to get around, which, that's what happens when you go to a festival. Like, you realize what you're getting into. At least I hope, for those of you that have been to a festival before. The bands that I wanted to kind of highlight, as far as all these bands seem so obvious to mention that they were good. So I'm not going to go, oh man, there's this band that opened up the first day of the festival that you just didn't see. That will be covered in many other publications. So Mineral is reuniting. They're doing a very extensive United States tour. They unfortunately got robbed recently, so that sucks, and that's terrible. So you should go to a show for not only supporting them, but then also on top of it, because it's amazing. It was one of those things, like, Mineral was an important band for me growing up, and I always enjoyed their records. It was definitely part of that first wave of me getting into music that wasn't screaming. So watching Mineral side stage was just like these songs. It's like, oh, wow. And I was talking to my friend Mike, who was standing right beside me. And it's weird because, you look at the lyrics of Mineral and they are so overdramatic. Like, if a band wrote those lyrics now in 2014, you'd be like, dude, that band's terrible. But because it's Mineral and it was a time and a place and it's perfect. Like, you don't feel anything but sincerity oozing out of everything that they're doing. And they were so good. So I highly recommend you seeing them on this US tour they're on currently. NoFX was incredible. I forgot how good that band was. Funny story. They were slated to go on right after Failure. And so Failure is finishing playing on one of the other main stages. It's like basically right across the way from NoFX. So Fat Mike is just, you kind of sitting there in the middle of the stage of NoFX and just watching Failure just go over their set time for maybe about 5-10 minutes. So Failure ends, Fat Mike just hops right on the microphone and just starts tearing into Failure in only a way that Fat Mike from NoFX can do, saying they're fucking terrible, they're an awful band, they've just bummed everybody out, NoFX is far better than they are. It was just hilarious. And then they played Punk and Drublic. Brought back so many feelings and memories of just listening to that record. Dude, that record's platinum. For those of you that don't know, a platinum record, you sell 1 million copies. Unbelievable. And I don't know, it's just, you forget certain bands exist for so long that you take them for granted. And NoFX, I 100% took for granted until I saw them again and was like, oh man, they're so good. So anyways, go check out NoFX, regardless of what they're playing, because realistically, most of their recorded output is awesome. And if it's not awesome, they'll tell you it's not awesome, and they'll name their record Coaster, which they did. And then, Descendants. Oh, I mean, Descendants can do no wrong in my mind. They're old, you know. They are definitely dudes that don't need to be getting on the stage and jumping around and playing their songs, but due to public demand, we want them there, and that is awesome. They played Milo Goes to College, and they're just, to me, they're like the perfect band. They were my entry point into independent music, and again, watching them, it brought so many positive memories back. And so, anyways, a trip down memory lane for me. Also saw a lot of good young and upcoming bands, Somos, Modern Baseball, Pianos Become the Teeth, a lot of previous guests of the show. So yeah, it was good times had by all. Dads, let's not forget Dads. They were also incredible. So Koji, let's get to the meat of the matter, so to speak. Koji, I've been wanting on this podcast for a very long time, but we just hadn't connected. I emailed, he said, I'm on tour. We basically just kind of kept missing each other. And then finally, our schedules coincided. We were able to hop on Skype, and I think he was at a coffee shop or something, but I was stoked that he wanted to do it, and I was stoked he was so locked in. Like, I could tell he was in a public place, but we could have gone on for at least 2 hours. But needless to say, I try not to subject anybody to that, mostly because of me. I wouldn't want to hear myself talk for that long. So anyways, Koji, he embodies a lot of the qualities that I define as very unique to independent music, being an artist, punk, hardcore, whatever you want to call it. He is that dude. He's walking the walk. He's living it, and extremely intelligent. We went to a lot of different places. I could tell that he was just really excited about expressing this stuff. So here's my conversation with Koji, and I will talk to you afterwards. What it is you are and what you do musically. I think the split you did with Evan, Into It Over It, was the first I had really like dove into you musically. I was aware of your existence, but I just never paid too much attention to it until that split. And it was one of those things where your side was immediately engaging to me, because I was like, this is interesting because it's obviously akin to what Evan is doing, but your own unique take on it. And then once I started to find out more about you, where it's just like, it's not just some, sad white dude, which is usually what this music exists in. Is it one of those things that, like, obviously people that just listen to your music assume one thing about you, as far as like just being, hey, yeah, this is just kind of another white kid from the suburbs talking about stuff?
Yeah, definitely people will think that Koji's a band first, that I'm a sad white person, and that the songs are about girls,
right?
Which is none of those things are true. And then when they find out a little bit more, like maybe they see a picture, they'll think that I'm from Hawaii, right, which my parents are, but I'm not.
Right.
And a lot of people think that I'm vegan. A lot of people think that I'm straight edge. A lot of people think that I'm Christian. A lot of people think that I'm Buddhist. A lot of people think that I'm atheist. And a lot of people, I've heard so many things about myself then told to myself.
Uh-huh.
It's just a reminder that people project what they want, and any sort of engagement to me is good if I can have a good positive attitude about it.
Yeah, you're like, if someone's not bringing so much baggage to the table that I can at least have a conversation about their preconceived notions on me, then we're good.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting, and I mean that's my singular goal in doing this is just to cause people to be curious and ask questions about their own life or like the world at large. That's the most important thing. So I think coming to the table as someone who's not your average like teenage or early 20s white kid doing this style of music is like, it's of course interesting to me because it's interesting enough that I would pursue it and want to create, but it's also interesting to see people engage with it because I don't know, with respect to like press lately, I've seen a lot of people talking about Dan Ozzie wrote that article about punks on pedestals, and then people responding or not responding to current events in Ferguson or in Gaza, and so like I got into punk because it was the urgency of it, but also the call to action was the most engaging thing to me. The social awareness and community aspect. Growing up in central Pennsylvania was something that I longed for because there were no Japanese Filipinos where I was growing up. I didn't have Asian peers that wanted to hang out with me. Like all the kids that were like fresh off the boat from like Vietnam or Korea or something like that, they did not want to hang out with me when I was in school. So I felt extremely isolated. I grew up in like an extremely polarized area where the East Shore is called the Black Shore, the West Shore is called the White Shore. Okay. And I always used to ask, where does that leave the yellow kid? Like I felt like I had no home. Right. And so like I feel eternally blessed that I caught the tail end of that part of punk where MySpace hadn't hit yet. Like there were message boards and LiveJournal and stuff, but you still had to go to a place or dress a certain type of way to express that you're different. We didn't have the internet to just solely do that. So I feel like more and more like punks and normal people look all the same and that there's not really authentic subculture. But I love that I could find that as like 11, 12-year-old growing up in central PA and found a space where I was allowed to be a minority, that was celebrated, and that in some instances my freedom to be that was protected by other members of the community. We had a huge white power sort of contingency. Yeah, for sure. So I grew up, like, all the very first shows that I went to had Nazi punks at them. And like, of course, I'm a target being a person of color. Right. And I don't think kids today, like, not to get all old head on everybody, but like I don't know if they know what that's like to go to a show and like be afraid that a hardcore crew is here and they have guns and knives and shit, or that there's Nazis there and they have guns and knives and shit. I'm not even sure people know what that's like. Yeah. Like they know the social fear of like, you know, general bully dynamics and things like that, but to actually be like bodily harm could occur to me tonight.
Why was it that you think that you know, the Asian kids that were in your community, you know, shunned you? Was it one of those things because you
racism?
Just straight up, you didn't
straight up racism.
You didn't fit their mold.
No, because I mean, I grew up knowing that where I was growing up in Harrisburg was the most racist. We're starting off on such a dark note. Where I grew up was one of the most racist parts of the country. That Pennsylvania and central Pennsylvania specifically had the highest concentration of organized hate groups. That was like a fact that I learned, that I was told by my parents to help protect me. And I think all people of color get a talk from their parents when they're growing up just about how to take care of themselves, because we face different issues than white people and we aren't afforded all of the same rights and securities as white people do. So when I was listening to Refused or Clash or Propaganda talk about class struggle and about racism and discrimination, that to me was more interesting immediately than people talking about, I don't know, getting stabbed in the back by their best friend or their girlfriend broke up with them. Right. So I think that the more pulled back worldview in my music kind of speaks to my initial interest into more political punk and hardcore. Especially from the area, you know, you primarily spent most of your time like in Harrisburg, right? As far as like sort of born and raised stuff. Yeah, definitely. I was born and raised in Harrisburg. And so knowing that community in regards to, you know, obviously it was a very large industrial town, you know, that the industries left that town and the city had to obviously figure out what to do with all of that. So I could see where your surroundings would immediately, you know, either inform you or make you open to the idea of trying to find that sense of community, because community was leaving that city. Right. And there's something really resonant about about, I was getting into shows like, I guess like maybe like 99, 2000.
Okay.
And there was something about that time where, even though we're in the prosperity of like the Clinton era, there was this resonance of like 77 punk through contemporary stuff that like was everything. So like I could find out about bands, whether it's like NoFX or Lagwagon or Rancid and stuff like that, through skate videos, and a lot of those songs are really fun. And then kind of trace back their roots and hear what like working class bands were singing about in England and whatnot. And all of it made sense because I was at once experiencing suburban life, having moved out, like as a teenager, moving out to the suburbs, kind of escaping what was a pretty violent and dangerous Midtown Harrisburg, and kind of surrounded by the collapse of industry. Like all the cotton mills, the steel mills, the coal mills, everything was closing when I was a kid. And so it was like the tail end of that. So I think there was a lot about punk music that represented that moment of time. And that's what's vital about the art form, is that it does that for every generation. But I remember pretty much every corner of punk music really resonating with me. So it's like if I needed to answer, I had a question about a life issue, there was a record I could turn to.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if there's that diversity now, but back then, I've always been a curious kid with quest for knowledge, and learning has been a deep and long journey, because I'm so screwed up about how the world works. I have to figure it out.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I like the way that you framed it in regards to you can find value out of most, art and music that's being created from that perspective, even though every band isn't going to tick every checkbox as far as like, oh, this band is like the perfect band. They're political, they're fun, or whatever. Like, there are very few bands that fall into that category, but you can find worth in a band like you were talking about, even though they are, speaking about cliche things, there's value in that as well, because it may be fun. It may provide entertainment, and that is valuable just as much as a political band is obviously valuable to you as well.
For sure. And I mean, like, for as much as some of the stuff that I'll talk about on stage or in interviews can be heavy, you can't be an activist. You can't be a human if you don't have a sense of humor. So all of the heavy stuff needs to come. Like, I mean, you need along with like on a dime, I can be listening to Pete Seeger, Woody Guthrie, or something like that, or I can be listening to anything and then turn around and listen to some horror rap or coke rap. I love Big L and Clips. I love and some of that's entertainment as much as it is also political. But you know what I'm saying? Like, you need the spectrum, otherwise you don't get the fullness of this life and this experience.
No, totally. And plus, it also doesn't inform the art that you personally create as well. It's like if you neglect one side of the music in general, and you're not even aware of it, you're closing yourself off to that experience.
Yeah. I think, the older I get, the more I vibe with all music and all expression. Like I'm chill. My attitudes towards everything has really chilled out, and I think that's made everything more enjoyable. Like I think when I was like a teenager, so much discussion over genres and what genres bands were. It was like subgenre war time.
Right.
Where that dominated conversations at shows, on message boards, like between friends and stuff. And I'm just like, who cares? Like, you get the same stuff out of most music. Like, you have to approach things with a different lens, but the form itself is so human. Why would we limit it to a label,
Yeah.
So I think that always like made me that kind of augmented my the discrimination that I faced. I felt like people get from liking anything, But I also think that's part of the fun of it, is like talking shit on people for liking stuff. Like,
right?
How is that not fun when you're 15 years old?
Right. Well, of course, because that is your universe. You don't have anything.
That's everything.
Right. That's everything. From Harrisburg, like, how did you even get, plugged into sort of independent music in general? Was it solely, like you were saying, like, skate videos and that sort of subculture, or was it just through other people that you kind of observe from a distance?
Yeah, well, I think it was the radio, like listening to like top 40
Mm-hmm.
and then realizing Green Day was like different sounding than everything else that was on the radio.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was Green Day was my intro punk band. So I think from them getting into like whether it was like The Clash or Replacements or Ramones or Husker Du, which I couldn't tell the difference between those bands
Yeah.
when I was at that age. I just knew that sounded all wildly different than what was on the radio.
Right.
And so I guess when my family got like cable and you could watch The Box and MTV,
Mm-hmm.
and then noticing like lifestyle wise, like what I was sort of gravitating to wasn't what to me represented like cookie cutter. Like I just read an article about how Abercrombie and Fitch is dropping their all logo branding in the United States because their business is doing that bad.
Right.
But like, in the late 90s and early aughts, like that kids used to have to really dress themselves different. So I would wear, like my Descendants t-shirt all of high school while everyone was wearing Abercrombie and Fitch stuff. And like, that's how I expressed, because I couldn't wear crazier stuff. Like my parents were pretty conservative. They're like, listen to whatever you want, read whatever you want. So I was definitely flagged by all the librarians, like even when I was in 7th grade, checking out all the books on like communism, socialism,
Anarchist
anarchy,
cookbook.
and they were like, "What is wrong with this kid in junior high?" And that followed me throughout. I was always the kid getting detention or suspended because I was fighting a bully over something racist, and then getting like volunteer of the year or student of the month type award for volunteer service. Because like I was reading about things like Food Not Bombs or anti-racist action or like what people were doing around like the Discord movement or with Riot Girl, and so like me and my friends, all we wanted to do was recreate that because we thought it was happening in every town across America,
right?
With like kids our age. That's what we thought was happening in America because we didn't have the internet to look up and find out that it wasn't.
Right.
So we were reading all these zines and websites and books and stuff and learning about the culture and just trying to recreate it. So we ran community dinners and held at every show, like had food drives. So if you didn't have money, you could bring canned food, and then we would store all this food in like this little warehouse and do like food pantry for like the neighborhood that we held the shows in.
Sure.
And that was super rad, along with, just doing shows and art shows and like slam poetry and things like that, creating zines. Like it was like a extremely creative time where we weren't talking about apps and we weren't photographing anything. Like if I wanted to, I couldn't find really any documentation of this stuff except for CDRs and a couple photo prints.
Right.
But really, like all of this exists in this really temporary space, which I think is like the archival completist of the digital age just fuels the elitist like fire even more, where people take themselves out of the moment. So via Instagram and Vine and Twitter and things like that, people are removing themselves from these like really pure shared experiences and just checking out. And I think like that's the major difference I look at from now to when I started going to shows. So like at all of my shows from now on, I'm going to request no cell phones because like I just want people to be together. That's the whole fucking point.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean there definitely is that sort of, charming element to when you do discover, I mean, I remember when it's like when I tripped on the whole, the crime think and like the Atlanta dumpster diving scene, and it was something that was so far removed from me because I couldn't, like, there was no one in your vicinity that was even like into that, but it was like such an appealing culture, and so to be able to even create it for a small period of time is exciting. Like I could easily see why you guys were just like firing on all cylinders because it's so
activating.
Yeah.
Like if you tap into it. And I think that my generation of like high school kids that I grew up with were exceptional. Everyone went on to go to art school, is working in the film industry, is like a printer or like some sort of creative writer, or a journalist, whatever. Like everyone kind of found work in their field and you could you could see that it all was seeded and started in what we were doing together in high school. Like we were reading each other's novels and
Right.
poetry and passing around demos and stuff like that. That's how we communicated and said to the people wearing Abercrombie and Fitch that we're fucking different, you know?
Right. We were making a stand because we're making weird shit over here.
Well, you had to do things. You didn't have to just reblog and aggregate fucking cool shit. You had to do the cool shit to say that this is what you are, you know?
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, there's that's the one thing that I like. My wife is a high school English teacher, and the one thing that I've always noticed, and this can be said about, you know, probably the high school you went to and the high school I went to, where it was like you felt like the notion of starting something in like while you're in school is so foreign to a lot of people. It's not instinctual. They're not like, you know,
right.
They don't have the idea to be like, oh, I just can't wait to graduate because then I'll be able to start life. And it's like, dude, you could do.
No, you start now.
Yeah. It's like you could start this.
Start now.
Right. Just do that.
I'm 27 and I booked my first show when I was 12 years old. I rented out a fire hall. I just passed it yesterday visiting my grandparents. I booked the Paxtonia Fire Hall in December 2000 or some shit. I forget.
Yeah.
But I was 12 years old when I booked my first show, and I just didn't stop.
Right.
It's 15 years of booking and playing shows.
Right.
And I was as a 12-year-old at playing music and booking shows, but I was doing it because I felt like you had to. I felt like if you weren't contributing, you're just not a part of it, which I think was probably a really extreme view. Like you can just be a fan, and it's dope. I love that. I love that people can just listen to music and enjoy it, but I feel like I was such a psychotic fan that I had to go out and do it.
Right. No, that's really, yeah, it's interesting where you do take these extreme views, obviously, when you're younger, where it's like, I'm either with it or I'm not. And there's no middle ground.
Like it defines you.
Yeah.
Like if you waste a single day not doing something, it defines you. And like I remember hearing, I forget what song it is, but on that Piebald record, the one where it's like, if you're bored, then you must be boring too.
Oh yeah.
And I really felt like Travis was speaking to me.
Sure.
I thought he was speaking to me. I was like, oh my God, I can never be bored again. I haven't said bored since I've heard that record.
Right.
I've not described the state that I was in as being bored since that record.
Right. Yeah, those little moments just completely, you know, carve their way into your heart, and it's like, well, never going to be bored again.
Yeah, no, never again. And I'm like, okay, well, I didn't have a lot of people to turn to, but there were like guys like Mike Park, and my cousin Jack was in a band called One Man Army and another band called Dead to Me.
Oh yeah,
and I used to go like see them on Warped or on tour and stuff like that. I was like, you know, there's like Asian dudes out here doing this. Like I could do it too.
Yeah, I could be a part of this.
I was like, because a lot of people tell you in Central PA that you can't do things. And I think anyone listening to this that ever grew up in a small town or a big one, there's like a serious crab mentality that people are with you when you're aspirational, and then when you start doing a thing, they want to tear you down because they don't want to be left behind, you know?
Sure.
And I think I had to find that personal courage to say no to the bullies, to say no to my teachers. Every year I had at least one teacher tell me, you're distracted by the music you're doing. It's a waste of time. It's never going to turn into anything. And that's crazy. That is heavy to hear when you're a kid. Mm-hmm. So like I think I made a nonverbal kind of vow, or I had a sense of understanding that if I were going to pursue the arts, I would spend my lifetime in the arts, encouraging people to create, mm-hmm. and encouraging them to live out what's in them. You know, like we're not allowed to access the better parts of ourselves because society says no. So I think that's like, you know, when I say I want to engage people, maybe if I'm being really specific, that's the way
right
that I want to engage them is to say like, yes, you can create. Yes, you can be human, and you have a right to live out the fullness of this human experience. In this data-driven society, we get that less and less and less and less. So I don't vibe with all this, and it's not that I'm against science, but I don't think there's intangibles to human life that data will never be able to sufficiently express.
Sure, yeah. There are certain things that are completely unmeasurable, whether you define it as faith or whether you define it as a feeling. Like those are impossible to quantify. I'd like to hit on something else in regards to, because, you know, as you started to, you know, matriculate through high school, and then, you know, you went to Tyler School of Art. Because during that time, you played in that band that you've mentioned before, El Toro, that was on Undecided, which was notoriously a terrible label just from the business practices, not so much the people involved. Even though one could extrapolate or could make the connection between the two. Was that kind of the first experience that you had in regards to obviously the business side going terribly wrong and then having to kind of leave your faith in music? Like, how was that all in your head when you were faced with something that was so, daunting, like a lawsuit to get your record back or whatever?
Yeah, that was wild. I had joined the band. We had written a record. We were waiting to record the record. I know that, like, at the time, this is so long ago, but the mentors of that band were Me Without You and Jesse from Brand New. They were like the older band guys that were sort of helping us out. And by sort of, I mean like kind of a lot. Like Me Without You gave us the A to B Life bus. And we had a record written, we had a record out already, but I wasn't on it. And we were waiting to go, like we were doing little tours and weekends and stuff. And then I guess because of some drama between Undecided and the parent label, they destroyed all of the records that we had. There's a person who will go unnamed that loves to confuse his business associates. So he has a track record of doing things like destroying like a label's catalog just because. I left art school, which I thought was kind of a scam. I was like, oh, you want me to go into like tens of thousands of dollars of debt? You're not going to tell me how to be a real artist. And then this first experience with the record industry, having them destroy all of my records and say, no, you can't create music as your band anymore. And I was just, well, fuck that. So I just went to being a local musician and decided that I would be self-released. And if I couldn't do it the right way, I wouldn't do it at all. So like fast forward years later, 4 or 5 years later, when Run for Cover hit me up, I was like, nah, I'm good. I don't do record labels. And when Evan and I were like, yeah, let's do a split. And he's like, we can have No Sleep put it out. And I was like, I don't know, man. Like,
you had to.
I don't know if I like record labels.
Totally.
I had this distrust, not realizing that like the industry had turned over and a bunch of idealists had started putting out records.
Yeah.
Didn't know that.
Well,
I couldn't see it.
Yeah, well, it's hard too, especially because when you're younger and you do have this notion, or you have this not notion, but you have this direct experience of being, screwed over and like your plans diverted. You have no choice but to rely on that as your guiding principle, as opposed to like, I mean, I totally remember like when, the band that I played in started to get some traction and managers started to speak to me. My instinct, probably like the instinct that you have or had at the time, where it's like, dude, manager, what the fuck you talking? Why would? But now, that's such an antique notion. People have managers all the time, and it's fine.
Well, I remember I was on tour with Jeff Rickley this spring, and I remember telling him that I printed the merch for the La Dispute. Their first club tour, which was first, they were opening a tour with Thursday, Fall of Troy, and Young Widows. And I remember them like showing up to the show and they had never played a stage before.
Right.
And they're like, we don't know if that's selling out, like if we play on the stage. And like, not to air them out, but this is the discussion that we were all having because we were just playing houses. I go around the like when I tour anywhere in the world, I want to explain to them that we used to play to no one together, and that's how we became friends. And then all of a sudden people started playing clubs and stuff. So there's like some people that never saw like those early days where it was really difficult. It took a couple of years for Somewhere to catch on.
Yeah.
And in that time they were playing basement shows, right, and hall shows. And so it's crazy to be like, would people look at La Dispute as the big band? And I still see I still see them, and I see us and our whole generation as like basement show dudes.
Yeah.
And we were concerned about playing a show because it might alienate people,
right,
or playing shows on the stage,
right,
because it would alienate people.
Totally.
What?
Right. No, it definitely, yeah, it's so quaint to think about it like that. But like, like we were talking about, it's like those are the realities that you're dealing with because that is your, your immediate touchable universe, and that's what you're used to. So it's like, but yeah, I mean, when you have a perspective, you're like, oh, that was silly. We never should have been concerned with that. But no, we should have. Of course, we should have.
Well, it definitely was important because I think there is this. It's not good to hold on to anger, but it's or to fear negativity. But it is constructive to work it out, and if you can do that in a as compassionate and empathetic and patient way as possible, not to say that we did that or I've done that, but I know that it was an important exercise to be skeptical. Because we didn't have the transparency within the music industry, and the scale of it was so large that people were really getting taken advantage of. You have an older generation of bands cautioning my generation of bands, and so we weren't wrong to kind of tread carefully. But a lot of people, whether that was like Jeff Rickley or the dudes in like. Well, and in any band, really helped chill us out because you realize, oh, Jeff put on At the Drive-In and Hot Water Music in his house, and Ink and Dagger, which is significant because I'm from PA.
Right.
And so many other like really rad bands in his house. They're the same. They were worried about moving off the floor onto the stage, and it happened really quick for Thursday. It happened really quick for a lot of those bands of that generation. So I think now I'm like, wow. There's kids right now playing basement shows that probably like hate bands that are popular right now, not realizing they did the same shit.
Yeah,
they had to suffer through basement shows and floor shows of all kinds to get where they're at.
Totally. Well, I think you hit on such an important point of whatever you can talk independent culture in general, culture at large. Of once you're provided context, it makes it easier for you to obviously understand. Like you're talking about, once you were able to, speak more in depth with Jeff and he can place things in context for you, it's like, oh, I see. So it's like, yeah, that it just makes all the more sense when you're like, oh, okay, we are cut from the same cloth. We're just different generations of that cloth.
Yeah. There's a complete interconnectedness about the whole thing. So if we can ignore aesthetics, if we can ignore some of the social aspects, if we can just look at the act of creating and of participating, no matter how it was dressed up when you were doing it or when you're connecting with it and finding it, I mean, that it's extremely powerful to find the arts, to find music, to find visual art, to find whatever medium speaks to you. That is a powerful moment in every person's life. And I think anyone that's connected and passionate about the arts, whatever that looks like, that's significant. That's a big yes. There's an active choice we need to make when we're looking at things like the arts, and it's to be dismissive or to look further into it, and in doing so, further into ourselves. And that's the magic, and it stretches far back beyond the term punk or the term folk. People have been getting together and expressing themselves for ages, and it's part of the stuff that gets us through every generation.
Yep.
So to be a part of it right now in this moment of time, it's not about being remembered or doing it right. It's just about having lived at this moment. And I think that, like, I don't know if it's harder for people to get there now because of technology, but I think, like, I'm disturbed that you can see the complacency, and you can see that there isn't this urgency to move to action. Because while I'm definitely not the hormonal 13-year-old finding punk rock now, I still have a complete sense of urgency when I'm approaching making work. It's definitely not as neurotic and freaked out, but I urgently know that it's a genuine need. It's part and parcel to, like, my makeup. So I have to do this, and I think people shouldn't be afraid of that impulse to have to be a part of the arts community. Everyone should say yes to that.
In preparing to speak to you, in almost every single print interview I've seen with you, it's always like, oh, Andrew Koji, activist slash musician. To me, every time I read that, there's always this instinctual feeling that I have in my gut anytime someone gets put in that corner. Like, honestly, when people hear activist, they immediately are just like, oh, great, another dude with another fucking cause. Like, I get it. And I think that limits the exposure that you personally could have. I mean, that's not to say that you are placing these labels on yourself. You have obviously just, your track record shows that.
Yeah.
So it's like, do you get the reaction from people being like, yeah, okay, cool, you're a guy with a cause and a guitar, like, or is it one of those things that because of the community that you're obviously appealing to, there's less direct feedback from that?
I definitely think there's a lot of people that don't want to hear what I have to say.
Mm-hmm.
My response to that is to definitely question what that resistance is, because it's a natural act to participate, to engage. Like, I think a lot of the anxiety from Western life comes from not an unwillingness to confront some of the more difficult things. Switching back and thinking, kind of like, I'm absolutely American. I love it when people say that I'm an American artist too, because I want people to know that an American artist can look like me.
Right.
Like, I want people to know that no matter how you're made, you count.
Yeah.
And that more than any specific social justice cause is important to me. But I look at, this is how I compute and cope with the injustice of the world. I think most of the injustice is unnecessary, if not all of it. So I'm trying to reconcile that. I can't turn away because people haven't let me. When it comes to my music or people responding to the activist bit, like, people respond to the racial part by telling me I'm their favorite Asian singer-songwriter or musician. Mm-hmm. And being told that by a white person is fine. I recognize that that's their education, and they're not necessarily sensitive to why I might react negatively towards that. But, like, can't I just rate on a human scale with everybody else? Why am I always taken out of the game? I taken out of the picture of the whole. Like, I feel like I'm just trying to live in harmony with everybody else out here existing, and trying to make it easier for people that feel oppressed to acknowledge that oppression and to deal with it in a productive way. Mm-hmm. It's fucked up that, you know what, I don't really want to talk about how people react, because that's really far outside of myself. Like,
sure,
well, I'm responding to them reacting. My reaction to the music industry and music community being so averse to, like, yeah, sure, Posi Punk is dead, but I'm not hearing anything from anyone. Like, Propaganda and Anti-Flag say shit about Gaza. Where's the rest of, like, the arts community on the injustice happening in Gaza? Where's the rest of them in Ferguson? And not speaking from like people don't want to come off as like the white savior or using their audience for some political shit, but what else are we making music for?
Right.
Like, if it's just to entertain, that's cool, but I'm out here to be really loud, to connect with people that want to make a difference. Because over getting famous and selling records, like, I'm out here to make a difference. Mm-hmm. And that sounds fucking crazy, and people should be right to be skeptical of me. You should question me, and you should question yourself, and you should question the things around you, because, like, I know for damn sure that a lot of the fucked upness about America comes from all these compounding forces that are the natural result of having a centralized society like this. So the fact that we have so many people densely populating the same area, we're going to have some crazy stuff going on. And we need to be students of history of current events if we're going to write that. People might not feel like it's their responsibility, but I think the most ugly part of the American attitude today is that Tea Party, individualistic, Ayn Rand sort of, I deserve more of, and what you have, you didn't earn. Mm-hmm. That attitude is toxic to me. I'm about the greater whole. Like I said, I'm trying to live in harmony. So through music and through activism and just through action, period, I'm just trying to do my best. And I think that's a hard sell if you're a booking agent or a manager or a record label.
Right.
You don't want to fucking deal with that. And how can I find the strength to do that? My dad, when I was listening to stuff like Propaganda, to Refused, and to, like, I really love the political shit. Mm-hmm. he came into my bedroom one day and handed me a Pete Seeger record. And I knew Pete Seeger because I grew up listening to Hawaiian and American folk and surf rock and Motown. And Pete Seeger was one of the names that I remembered. He handed me the CDs. Like, I know you're listening to all this political stuff right now. They had just like bought me like a stack of Chomsky and Zinn books.
Nice.
And he was like, here, maybe you might find something in this guy's stuff that resonates with you. And I remember listening to that and definitely like weeping at one point, listening to the voices because of all the hurt that I felt in the world. There was a really healing sound listening to someone talk about peace and justice and getting people to sing together, you know? And that was just as profound as finding punk rock, is like returning to American folk and the powerful medium that is. And I don't know if that can exist in the same form today. In fact, I don't think it can exist in that form, but I'm definitely reaching towards whatever that was then. I want to be a part of the people who carry the torch for this generation, you know?
Yeah. Well, that's it. I mean, that's such a powerful moment that you describe, because it is, you know, while you know, the notion of your parents not understanding the stuff that you're getting into from a, you know, just like a musical standpoint, just like, okay, I don't get this at all. But the support of just reaching out to be like, okay, this is a cultural touchstone for me, like, check this out. Like, that is extremely powerful, because like you know, so obviously a lot of parents would look at what you're getting into and react the complete opposite way and be like, oh, Andrew, like, dude, you gotta like chill out, dude. Here's some like more, you know, vanilla based music. Like, we gotta calm you down, because you're already you're trying to become a minority of a minority of a minority.
Yeah. How much more of a victim can you make yourself, you know?
Totally. Yeah, you're on the outside on so many different parts, but well, that's cool that your parents came down to obviously like show you what it was that influenced them.
And during the McCarthy era, Pete Seeger was blacklisted. The music industry wouldn't put out his records. The music industry wouldn't put on his shows. So he did the DIY basement thing and played, like, halls, would show up to radio stations, find a place to play that night, announce the show, real sly-like, and then play to whoever would come. So, like, for me, like, that has always been my sort of attitude and the touchstone when I need courage to go and present ideas in the face of extreme resistance, you know?
Yeah. It's encouraging for you.
People ought to have a problem with authority. I think that's a really healthy thing for kids.
Oh, yeah.
And I wish, I really want to connect with the young people that have an authority problem, because I still do. You know, like, I still have a problem with institutions. I think we have so much work to do in America, and I'm going to live as long as possible and live as loudly as possible to make sure that I did as much as I could in the short time that I have here to make the world a little better, you know? And that's like so naive, and I think we ought to be more naive.
Yeah.
We ought to take more risks, and we ought to have a fucking problem with how things are right now.
Yeah. Well, no, it comes through in the way that you talk, and obviously the way you deliver not only your music, but the passion that just kind of bleeds not only onto tape, but obviously just in speaking with you. And in knowing, you know, in knowing obviously your music and knowing you a little bit casually over the years, you've always struck me as a very you know, you're a sensitive dude, and like, not a sensitive like, oh, I'm going to, you know, whatever, sit in my bedroom and write a song about it, but a sensitive as far as like, you know, speaking about, you know, crying over Pete Seeger. Like, has that always been kind of, you know, in you? Have you always been the sort of stereotypical, you know, sensitive art kid from that perspective?
I need to air myself out about Pete Seeger, but it's like, that's like one of the only times I can really remember crying. I feel like I have the typical leadership gene where I will defer how I feel because I have a show to book, or, you know, like there's some sort of volunteer project or something like that. Like, okay, I want to be really solid and together, but I think I only have a capacity for that because I am definitely sensitive and in tune with other people's suffering. Like, I really strive to be empathetic and compassionate. So yeah, I guess so, but it realizes itself in different, really quiet ways, I think.
I that's very interesting you put it that way, because I do think that there is that when you do start to feel, you know, like you are responsible for, feeling like you are a together person in order to be like, hey, you're inspirational in some capacity. Not to say that you're looking to engage as opposed to be, inspirational.
Yeah, I just want a dialogue.
Yeah.
You know,
But there's no time for you in the presentation of yourself to really, dwell in your emotions and to be, I guess, publicly distraught, if that were, like on an emotional level. Like obviously on a political level, you're completely engaged on that, but you're like,
yeah,
dude, there's not enough time to cry about it. There's more time. That gives me less time to be, actionable.
for sure. Well, like I look at my work kind of since having begun releasing songs, and I definitely see that I didn't write any love songs, even though people might think that a lot of my songs are about girls.
Mm-hmm.
It's mostly about personal courage and arriving at a better place, and it's certainly existential and layered and open enough for people to make their own meanings out of it. But I'm looking at the songs I've been writing lately, and that deals a lot more with the interpersonal stuff, and I'm finding that engaging with those questions in my music has definitely led me to realize some things about, I'm realizing now that the existential and societal stuff speaks just as much truth to me as the person to person stuff, and that the two are extremely related. Mm-hmm. So I think this has been an interesting time creatively, how my voice has matured, lyrically, and I don't know. I want to revisit this question a year from now, because this is one of the most interesting creative points, because I find myself digging deeper into the interpersonal stuff, and I have written basically 2 records worth of breakup songs.
Right. Well, no, it sounds like you're at that definitive point of like a, whatever, pardon the cliche, but like, turning a page, like you're in the new chapter where it's like you are looking inside of yourself for that direct dialogue that you have, honestly, like neglected because you felt that there are greater things to speak about. But now you realize the connection between the two, and that's super interesting to hear that, kind of manifesting itself.
Yeah, I'm learning a lot just by having to sing. It's really wild. My writing style comes from improvisation, and I usually just start playing and singing, mm-hmm. and what comes out is what makes the record. And I've been looking and really thinking that this is a very interesting time.
Yeah. Do you, with kind of what we were talking about earlier in regards to, obviously social media, and while you do engage in it, I do think there's elements of you, you probably are very deliberate in what you obviously put out there, in regards to, being a private person. Like you strike me as having a public persona, but then obviously trying to keep things private as well, in order to not feel like it's like this, hey, here's the Koji show 24/7. Is that something you've kind of, whether it's a struggle or whether it's a deliberate thought process that you've had to kind of filter through?
I think it comes down to one thing, and that's I want people to meet me in person as a person. So like the most disturbing thing to ever happen to me was, with regularity, people would come up and grab my goatee at Warped Tour when I was playing. And then they would say something to the effect of, "I've always wanted to do that." And then I'm thinking to myself, you've always, like, this is a premeditated goatee grab. Like, what?
Right.
Like, and I was like, I wish the thing you always wanted to do was have a conversation, because I want to know, what band they're in. I want to know what social issues are important to them, how their day was, where the good food is, where they come from, what their community is like, just anything, what they're going to school for. I want to know that.
Right.
Like, touring is how I learn about the world. I'm a lifelong learner, and touring has been the best school for me. So I think that when I put things on the internet, I'm still refining my voice, because that's not the thing that comes naturally to me.
Right.
The thing that comes naturally to me is being out on the floor with everybody else. So like I definitely don't take advantage of my green room. I don't take advantage of. I prefer shows that don't have one that force us all to look at each other with the house lights on.
Mm-hmm.
Like straight up, if there is no, I could have shortened this whole conversation up by just saying like Fugazi and Discord are why I am.
Right.
And we'll toss Pete Seeger in there and Otis Redding.
Sure.
And Superchunk, Merge Records. Yeah, those are like that's pretty much it.
That's your DNA.
And sonically, politically, like ethos wise, like for sure. And then of course, like my really strong family. Like we are super close because there wasn't a ton of people like us in Central PA.
Mm-hmm.
And as time went on, we found a Filipino community. My grandparents moved out to Central PA, so like I had a broader sense. But at that time, I had already experienced that sort of isolation.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at all of it now, I'm like, wow.
Right.
It's like it's because I grew up on this cultural island where it was so racially divided, and I was so isolated that I found a thing like punk rock, and that ultimately shaped the trajectory of my life.
Yeah. Well, I think, I mean, to me, what I think is obviously so engaging about, not only your story, but who you are as a person, where it's like, we need, when I say we, it's like the independent music culture needs voices that aren't so, for lack of a better term, homogenous. It's like,
yeah.
I mean, honestly, it's like my experience as a, suburban white kid who's, straight edge and vegan is like, yeah, there are elements and shades of it that are unique, but relatively speaking, you can find me kind of anywhere. So it's like for people such as yourself, where it's just like, yeah, it's like there's different shit, like there's different textures to it. And I think that's what ultimately not only make for better conversation, but make for better art when you are having, this proverbial melting pot, because it needs to be like that.
Yeah, well, I'm really interested in being American. My family line, I'm like second and a half generation.
Mm-hmm.
My dad comes from kind of like a line of Japanese immigrants who immigrated to Hawaii and were working on sugar plantations.
Okay.
And then the United States made Hawaii a territory and then a state.
Mm-hmm.
And then my Filipino side, my grandfather was naturalized through the U.S. Air Force, and I come from my dad is also a retired naval commander, and like I come from an immigrant family that served our country, and I'm really interested in democracy and in being American, and how that affects people in their everyday life. So I'm asking those questions because I'm trying to reconcile, like my own identity, because I was told that I wasn't American growing up.
Sure.
I told that I'm not a citizen. When 9/11 happened, my high school thought that it was the Japanese, and I'm the only Japanese kid with a Japanese name in my high school.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to get into like fist fights every day of like elementary school, and like every year of my life. And then people will tell you, and people have told me that it's not so bad. Racism doesn't exist. That probably didn't happen to you. And it's taken away. So people can't take away what I'm singing about. They can't stop me from singing unless they kill me. Like They can't stop me from putting out records and sharing work, engaging with people until like, if I have air in my lungs, this is what I'm going to do. And that's what I mean, the urgency to express myself, because I'm still trying to figure it out. I'm still trying to figure out what it is to be an American, what it is to be human, because I was told that I was less than those things.
It reminds me of something I personally experienced, where it's like when I was first able to tour Japan, I had the ability to visit Hiroshima, and it was it was one of those things where it was so. Like, I mean, for one, I was nervous going there. I think I was maybe 26, 27 at the time. So I was old enough to obviously know what's up. But I felt so strange, because it was like, I asked our translator, I was like, excuse my ignorance, but are Americans welcome there? That's a heavy thing, be a part of. And he's like, yes, of course. Like, this is, it's a park, it's beautiful. It's, there are, symbols of remembrance. And so like, but going there, it was one of those things where, like you're talking about, your identity as an American is really, is not only put into question, but you're having to focus on something that is so singularly horrific that we, imparted, due to warfare on another culture. And it did make me feel, less of an American because I felt so horrible for the whole situation,
Yeah.
And so it is interesting for you, wanting to fight for that identity, because that's something that has been so, like you were talking about, been tried to strip away from you for a long period of time.
Yeah, and I mean, as an adult, doing this for a living now for a few years, the notion from people that I'd be more successful if I were more white, if I were less political, if I were less outspoken, and just like a really nice and visible minority, that I would somehow find more success if I would make an effort to be cuter, or make an effort to be, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not a cute white kid.
Right.
I'm not. I don't fit the mold, and so I really have to be comfortable with myself, because how I am is a problem for some people.
Right. Well, yeah. Has there been, sort of like business-like circumstances that have put you to where you could get that sort of weird feedback, whether it is like you're joking that, you need to, all right, let's work on your image. Like, have you ever been put in situations like that where it's like, oh dude, this person has no idea where I'm coming from. Like, they're barking up the wrong tree, so to speak.
Yeah, I've definitely had the impression from some people that I could have opportunity A or B if I just like changed myself a little bit. Or like, my vision for you is this, and it looks nothing like the person that I am when I'm hearing their vision, So I don't know. I think we live in an interesting time because the cultural barriers are a lot lower, if anything, non-existent within popular culture. It's cool to like anything, to be anything, and there's a lot of cultural mobility. We have an ever-growing class problem in the United States, which is a huge issue. Education is extremely, extremely expensive, and they're cutting so many really important programs, whether that's pre-K, kindergarten, or the arts, or even phys ed on top of all of those things. Those are vital to the development of a young person, and because it was vital to my development. And so I see us being pacified by our screens. And it's at once really beautiful because all the tools are democratized to make a record and market it, to to share it with friends, to become a photographer, to become kind of anything that required like a huge financial investment before. But the cost of living is really straining us in other areas. Our minimum wage is so below what the cost of living is in America now. It's really insane. So we have like a gigantic working poor class and an unwillingness to look at the problem. So I still view music as like a really powerful tool to engage with people on those issues, to introduce them and to maybe organize people to make a difference.
Yeah.
I still go see my legislator. I still go to demonstrations, work on petitions, write letters to Congress, volunteer where I can. And I want to start telling people, I've been such a private person and out of I haven't wanted to seem opportunistic with the things that I've been doing, but now I'm starting to see that I need to share a little bit more of that story so people can go out and recreate it like I did when I was a kid, reading about Ian and Minor Threat and Fugazi or Bikini Kill and stuff like that, finding inspiration from other kids on how to go out and do something and make a change.
Yeah.
That's been a really interesting path because honestly, I disregard what people limit me to on the basis of my race or my political beliefs. I'm not concerned because the result isn't being successful and getting like a house in the suburbs or a house anywhere. It's not for financial gain that I'm doing this. It's just straight passion. It's like, it's my purpose and I'm living it. And I'm really comfortable with that,
right? Even
though it might alarm people who don't live that way.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's a foreign concept for a lot of people. So like, yeah, you that might disarm them. The last thing I want to hit on before I let you go is in the way that I've seen you describe, recording and obviously the creation of music and kind of like what we were alluding to earlier, and you were in regards to you addressing different song subjects now. Recording to me, in the way that I'm interpreting you to put it out there, it's a very deliberate and cathartic process for you, which those don't necessarily define pleasure in my own head. So is recording tough for you to be like, this is a huge undertaking and I have to be very concerned about what I'm putting out there to the world? Records for some people are, you know, just kind of a timestamp. Whereas I think for you, they're kind of, a more, not only a representation of yourself, but existing more into the future. So I got in a long-winded way of saying, you know, is recording pleasurable for you? Recording
is, previously was the most difficult task because I feel incomplete as an artist. I feel incomplete as a human. And within the context of recording, I think that incompleteness makes for compelling records because the record is just evidence of us existing. Like you said, it's a timestamp. I want to be as naked as possible when it comes to expressing and performing the songs on tape as I can be. So it's at once the most terrifying and difficult part of the music process for me. But the most liberating and cathartic. And I will say that working on new material this summer, this is the absolutely most lighthearted I've ever been about recording. And I think it comes from like first of all, not playing like 150 shows and then making a record. That's really useful, like having this long layoff and my first summer off in years. And then pairing that with reconnecting with my family, doing things like rock climbing and yoga throughout the week to really center myself, paying attention to what I eat, really practicing my craft. So I feel like I have the most air in my lungs that I've ever had to sing. I feel like I have the best mental perspective and mental approach to the music. It's like it's taken a really holistic picture. So I think this record is, again, a pivotal one, not just in subject matter, but in how I approach recording. Like there is a renewed joyfulness about it and a renewed freeness. And I'm just, you know, making demos and doing pre-production right now, but it feels like I've never made a record before.
Right.
And I never thought I would like say something like that because that sounds dumb. I've made a lot of records,
right.
But like this is the first one I feel like I'm making.
Yeah. Well, fancy that idea of like, wait a minute, you're existing in the real world and you're becoming a person. Well, why would that do any wonders for a record? It's like these bands feel like such a continual pressure to release more music and obviously like feed that machine. And it's like, then a lot of the times their art is just caught up in this, self-perpetuating, conveyor belt, as opposed to like what you're doing, where it's like plugging into things that will give you inspiration.
Yeah. And I think I always approach every task with a sort of holistic picture. Like, what are the steps I'm going to need to take to have a high level of wellness and offer something really healthy and productive? And I mean, sometimes it is, again, like being so broken as I have been, going into the La Dispute split. I had just lost my friend Nate Henn to a suicide bomber attack in Uganda. Mm-hmm. And I went into the studio devastated. So I think like listening to that record is extremely, I didn't sing well on that record or play guitar well on that record. I just played it as best as I could in the state that I was. And to me, that's one of the most powerful recordings that I've ever made. Mm-hmm. Like I don't have adjustments for that record. There's things where I know it could have been better, but I wouldn't change a thing about that record. Whereas like every other record that I've made, I've allowed myself to be critical about, but I know that in making that record, I was so where I was, and the listener doesn't even know this.
No.
So many people, download the record illegally, or they buy the MP3s. They don't read the dedication in the liner notes, in the vinyl. And there's no press about it. Mm-hmm. I just made the record from that standpoint. They don't even know that that's what they're hearing. But that's what, So I'm very open to where I am when I record and try to be patient and forgiving that I'm not perfect. And in some cases, it's allowed to accept my hurt because, again, there was a community of activists. There was a community of people grieving at that point that I didn't allow myself to grieve except for when I was finally alone in the studio. Mm-hmm. And everyone's kind of privy to where my heart was at that moment.
Yeah. That's a really important, I wouldn't even say footnote, that's a really important context for that recording. And ultimately, recorded output in general, needs to come from some place. It doesn't need to be of hurt or despair. It can be like you're coming at it right now, like a renewed vigor of like, oh, this is my first LP. Can't wait to dig into this.
Yeah, it spans that spectrum. And I hope that my records will reflect the spectrum of experience.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think it's an important, like you said, spectrum to have. It's not just this one note of that's all you are as a person. So, well, dude, I could not thank you enough for hanging out and doing this. I think this is very enjoyable for me, and I hope it was enjoyable for you.
Thank you for having me and allowing me to share. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, dude, it's my pleasure. So there is Koji and all he is. So, like I said, really intelligent guy. And I just loved having that conversation with him and seeing his unique cultural perspective, his unique racial perspective, because it's like independent music is always viewed through a very narrow scope a lot of the time. And when artists of different cultural backgrounds and races contribute to the overall tapestry that is independent music, I love it. It just adds so many cool shades to what we have going on, and yeah, it's just great. So I celebrate him for who he is, and he writes amazing songs. Let's not forget that. The producer for the show is Tom Richfield. Visit propertyofzach.com. Visit 100wordspodcast.com. Yeah, I'm not even going to tease the guest next week. Why don't you just hop on to the website and sign up for our email list? Boom, there you go. That's a teaser. And it's my birthday next week. You can't be more excited than I am. I'll be turning 34 years old. Exciting, right? Not really. 34, it's such a useless age. Anyways, until next week, be safe, everybody.